Have you ever wondered why the dragon is by far the most widely recognized and iconic mythological creature throughout history? There's no evidence of them ever living on Earth like the dinosaur, but that's my point actually. Fictional characters come and go, evolving with generations that pass, but the dragon has remained constant throughout every era. What if I told you that there are people who genuinely believe in, or at least wonder about, the true existence of dragons? Disclaimer, it's gonna get spiritual. I find it truly fascinating how dragons are included in almost every culture throughout history around the world, from the most ancient of times and still in our present day, and not just in artwork and in media, but in sacred beliefs and practices. We're going to go on a sort of deep dive into the history of dragons, covering some specifics, so if you've already gone on your own unhinged deep dive into dragons, maybe feel free to comment any details that are not mentioned in this video, and you are more than welcome to sharing your personal experiences as well. So the earliest known depiction of a dragon remains unknown, but the earliest piece of evidence that we have is the jade dragon from Hongshan, Inner Mongolia, China, dating between 4500 and 3000 BCE. As you can see, the artist didn't depict this dragon as the ferocious beast that we're all familiar with. There's a calmness to this carving, its facial expression is very peaceful, and it almost looks like the dragon is slightly smiling. Contrary to the mythology of other cultures, dragons were perceived in a positive light in ancient China and held in very high honor. These creatures were respected and admired. They symbolized prosperity and were associated with life-giving rains and water sources. Many of these dragons were often described as these giant, yet thin, agile, and graceful creatures who would dwell in the clouds or in sources of water. It was said that when they would fly, they were often accompanied by lightning and thunder. The Chinese dragons were and still are viewed as benevolent rather than the malicious beasts we've seen in other myths and art. That's why they became associated with rulership in China, because they embodied all the great qualities that the rulers were expected to have. Rulers would also emulate dragons because they were considered one of the most intelligent beings, along with the phoenix, unicorn, and tortoise. There's a famous myth that tells of Yu the Great being assisted by a dragon to help manage the floodwaters that were devastating his kingdom. Some early legends depict Yu as a dragon or a half-dragon himself. One story recounts of how a small dragon flew into the heavenly palace during a divine meeting. The dragon transformed into a tall young man and boldly introduced himself as Yu. Dragon King Lung Wang appears in other myths as the ruler of all water, using his ferocity to protect China and its people. He was adopted by Taoists and Buddhists later on. Long Wang is the leader of the 4 dragon kings who preside over the oceans and rivers of earth. There's Ao Guaang, the azure dragon who rules the east and spring, Ao Qing, the red dragon who governs the South China Sea and represents summer, Ao Shun, the black dragon who lords over Lake Baikal in the north, embodying winter, and Ao Run, the white dragon, who symbolizes the west and autumn, serving as the god of Qinghai Lake. All 4 must bow to the Jade Emperor, who is the ruler of heaven in ancient Chinese beliefs. These dragon kings partner with freshwater dragons, who control rivers, springs, and lakes, collectively ruling over all weather and water on the planet. That includes winds, storms, tornadoes, and so on. Which might explain why those earlier depictions of dragons are in a circular motion and of course made of jade. According to legend, these dragons care deeply about the suffering of humans and all living things. In one story, they ascend from the earth to the heavenly plane to beg the Jade Emperor to please send rain during a time where a drought was slowly desiccating all living things. The Jade Emperor promised to send rain, but he couldn't fulfill the promise in time. The dragons became anxious, and after 10 days of continued suffering, these compassionate dragons used their large bodies to carry water from the seas to the land themselves. The people rejoiced and thanked the Jade Emperor, but because of the loss of water from the sea and because of the dragon's technical disobedience of the Jade Emperor, he chose to imprison the 4 dragons in different mountains. But legend has it that each time a dragon was trapped, a new river sprang forth, ensuring that they would always have a way to provide China with water. Over 40 Chinese rivers have the word dragon in their name. Many locals believe that any nearby water source was the home of a dragon. Not to mention, it is the only mythological creature of the Chinese zodiac, which, side note, some astrologers and readers swear that the Chinese zodiac is the most legitimate and, if not the only zodiac, to really pay attention to. It is said that the Jade Emperor hosted the great race amongst all animals, and the first 12 to cross a great river would have a year named after them. Despite being a powerful celestial being and having a good chance at coming in first, the dragon stopped along the way to assist people in desperate need of help and came in 5th, showcasing its humility. This is just a personal observation. I think it's interesting that the dragon is the 5th animal of the Chinese zodiac. It reminds me of the 5th element being spirit, and it's just like a weird correspondence how the dragon is the one spiritual creature and the 5th element is that of the spirit as well. This is just a personal observation. I'm a life path 5. The dragon known as Muskushu was found on the famous Ishtar Gate of the city of Babylon, built around 575 BCE. That dragon was inspired by the ancient story called Enuma Elish, which many historians believe is the oldest creation myth on record, dating as far back as the 18th century BCE. Which is why I want to briefly touch on part of that story and its association with dragons. The story begins with the universe in a state of watery chaos. This chaos causes the water to eventually separate into 2. The watery deep or fresh water personified by the god Apsu, and the salt waters or the seas personified by the goddess Tiamat. Once differentiated, they would then merge together to create new elements, all personified by different gods, such as Silt, represented by Lachmu and Lahamu, twin deities who, interestingly enough, have also been described as serpents. The horizons, so on and so forth. So of course, with the creation of these newer elements or gods, came a lot of disruption from what their elders knew. It ultimately resulted in a war between them. Apsu, the father, could not rest or function the same, so his instincts was to destroy his children, maybe even fearing their power. Tiamat, the mother, was horrified. She begged and pleaded for a more peaceful resolution. But the decision was made. Ultimately, before he could fulfill his evil plan, Enki, god of wisdom, destroyed him first. Tiamat was left devastated. Not only that, but she was then tormented by wind sent from one of the younger gods, and severely pressured to avenge her partner's death. She eventually gave in, birthing 11 monsters to assist her, including a few dragon-like creatures, even taking the form of a giant sea dragon herself. In the end, Marduk, chief god of Babylon, defeated Tiamat by cutting her into 2, using one half of her corpse to create the earth and the other to create the heavens. And that is why he is depicted with Muskushu, one of those 11 creatures, by his side as his servant, and why the same dragon is found on the Ishtar Gate, representing Marduk's victory over chaos and the co-creation of humans that would follow. Muskushu, translating to reddish snake, was worshipped as a symbol of protection. Another one of Tiamat's creations is known as Basmu, an enormous horned snake with 4 arms and wings, described as 60 miles long, who seems to represent the dangers of the sea, also represented by the constellation that would later be named the Greek Hydra. And there's also Usumgala, a fierce hybrid dragon who eventually evolved into an honorable figure of divinity. Marduk himself became known as Usumgal Kalis Pariki, peerless ruler of all the sanctuaries. Golden icons of Usumgala were placed at the pedestal of Ninurta, another prominent god in ancient Mesopotamian practice. Now, the Ouroboros is one of the oldest sacred symbols and has been interpreted in different ways by different cultures over time. The earliest depiction of the symbol was found in ancient Egyptian funerary literature, such as the Amduat and the Enigmatic Book of the Netherworld, which revolves around death and the afterlife, and dates as far back as the 16th century BCE. These texts were inscribed inside of kings' tombs to guide the deceased pharaohs on their passage through the realm after death. The Ouroboros was found in the tomb of King Tut, actually. So here you could see how the symbol could represent the ongoing cycle of life and death, and in some beliefs, rebirth as well. But the symbol has also been used by alchemists over the centuries, such as Cleopatra, not the Queen of Egypt, but the Greek alchemist, who published the Cruciphia of Cleopatra. In it is her own drawing of the Ouroboros, and in the center is a text that means one is all, representing the unity of all things, both physically and spiritually, emphasizing the interconnectedness of the universe, and that everything is a part of the continuous cycle of creation and destruction. It may also represent the nature of the world, with no clear beginning or end, and the idea of eternity. But get this, okay? I get a kick out of the story. This one's not a myth. This happened. There was once a German chemist named August Kekule who became very frustrated in his attempt to decode the structure of the compound benzene. So he decided to recharge and take a nap by his fireplace. While dreaming, yes, dreaming, he saw these images of atoms that started to behave like serpents. And one in particular curled up and put its own tail in its mouth, and this woke the chemist up. That vision really spoke to him, and is what inspired him to continue working out his equations until he finally proved the form of benzene. Fascinating, isn't it? Apparently, volcanoes and forest fires are some of the natural causes of benzene, which again, I just found interesting because many of us associate dragons with fire, and he was sleeping by a fireplace. Which leads me to our next destination in history, actually. Medieval Europe. Because the fire-breathing dragon was more popularized later on in medieval Europe, specifically in the epic poem called Beowulf by Anglo-Saxon. This poem tells the story of Beowulf, the Scandinavian king who kills a dragon that was attacking his people's homes with its fiery breath. Scholars claim that this story was heavily influenced by Christianity because, quote, while Beowulf is set in a pre-Christian world, the poem was likely transcribed or edited by a Christian monk or scribe. As a result, there are Christian references and themes woven into the text. Now, dragons were not a huge part in the earliest teachings and writings of Christianity, but they were later on used as symbols of evil or Satan. Specifically in the book of Revelation, dating around 95 to 100 AD. In Revelation 12:9, quote, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. Or in Revelation 22, he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. It was even later on during the medieval period where dragons were referenced in a more mythological way in Christian culture. One famous story is St. George and the Dragon, the tale of a knight who slays a dragon that was terrorizing a town and also saves a princess, illustrating moral lessons of good, aka Christianity, over evil, symbolized by the dragon. A creator here on YouTube called Mr. Mythos made an entire video providing evidence on the theory that Yahweh, the God of the ancient Israelites, was a dragon by cross-examining biblical evidence with traditional dragon folklore and using direct translations from the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. I'm going to link that video in this description, and I recommend you check it out if you want to go even further down this rabbit hole. Separately, there's another fascinating point that Mr. Mythos discussed as well that I would like to bring up. which involves the angelic hierarchy, specifically the 3 spheres of angels. The top choir of the first sphere, aka the one closest to God, is the Seraphim, who are known for their devoted worship and praise of God. They're described in Isaiah 6:2-3, quote, "Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." The seraphim are messengers of God, acting as the bridge between the divine and the human realm and serving as purifiers. In Isaiah 6:6-7, one of the seraphim brings the burning coal from the altar and touches the prophet Isaiah's lips, purging him of sin and purifying him for his next mission. The point made is that some scholars and interpreters have linked the seraphim to what sounds very similar to the dragon, not just because of their association with fire and filling the temples with smoke, but the similarities and potential connection to what's described as fiery flying serpents in other parts of the Bible. It ultimately remains unclear what lies beneath the seraphim's wings, whether they cover their bodies for humility or are shielding their blinding fiery bodies. But the point that he makes is that the depictions and art of the seraphim with human bodies is technically biblically inaccurate. Whether they are related to dragons or not, it is interesting how flying serpents are found in other cultures too, whether they are just symbols or potentially actual spiritual entities. So it's no surprise that dragon spirits make their appearances into different forms of shamanism. The shamanic lifestyle remains very close to the earth, unlike many of our current lifestyles in the city, totally disconnected from nature. They honor that everything has a spirit and connect to the spiritual realm and to the ancestors through shamanic practices. And their ultimate mission is to heal. Dragons are powerful protectors and guardians in the shamanic beliefs, heavily associated with the elements, especially with water and rain. They are bringers of good fortune and fertility and have the ability to enter dreams. They embody strength, wisdom, and transformation. Dragon spirits are believed to have alchemical power, meaning that they hope to turn you into gold spiritually. Having a connection to the dragon is a great gift and should be accepted with gratitude and humility. Shamans also recognize that everything is connected and interdependent to each other. So if one species suffers, it affects all others. If our earth suffers, it ripples through the delicate balance of nature, disrupting the harmony that sustains all life. So what if dragons are, in fact, these celestial ancient energies, ready to assist all living things under the rule of God? Could these creatures actually exist in the dimensions beyond what our eyes can see? With there being such contrasting beliefs on the spiritual being throughout history, some must wonder if there are good and bad people, for example, which is a choice we make. Could there be good and bad dragons? Some do believe that there are both benevolent and malevolent dragon spirits out there. Some believe that they are just products of the human imagination or an iconic representation of our symbolic nature. Others may speculate that our ancestors saw these serpent-like shapes in nature and maybe personified them as these higher spiritual beings. But many of us can't help but wonder if our ancestors had a stronger connection to the spiritual realm, because many of us have felt that type of connection ourselves. You know, I didn't go down this rabbit hole for nothing, and I'm not discussing this esoteric topic out of nowhere. I am one of the many people who have had the incredible blessing and honor of waking up to dragon consciousness, as I call it. I was once someone who associated the dragon with Shrek and like nerdy fantasy fiction stuff, Anyways, this video isn't about me. I just wanted to share that my personal experience spiritually directly reflected the beliefs of ancient China. And you know what's crazy? I didn't even realize that until doing this research years later. It was a positive experience, and I really attest it to the fact that no matter how others may judge me from behind their little screens, I have the innate desire to be a part of the good in this world. And the dragon came to me during a time where I had to make some very hard decisions out of love and doing what's right. So, if you've ever wondered how the image of dragons came to be, like that of an angel or a fairy, those enigmatic beings we can't seem to see, could it be that there is more than what our eyes can perceive beyond the 3D? Beings you won't find out on the streets, but maybe, just maybe, in your dreams, or perhaps in your waking conscious thoughts. For dragon spirits are known to visit those who are pure of heart, to share a touch of magic, light, and transformation, and assist humanity in our evolution, to help us burn away our old ways of thinking and being, for our choices not only affect this world, but might also have a ripple effect on realms beyond this planet Earth. With that, I have one last question for you. Do you believe?
What if the old stories are true?
Oh, come on. They're all just stories.
I have never seen a dragon.
And just because you don't see something doesn't mean it's not there.
And just because you say it's true doesn't mean it is.
If you go through life only seeing what's right in front of you, you're going to miss out on a whole lot.
Is this all real? Or is it just happening inside my head?
Of course it's happening inside your head, Harry. Why should that mean that it's not real?